Hello everyone, my name is Lowko, and today it is time for a professional match of StarCraft 2. Spawning here in game number 1 of this best of 3 series in the bottom right hand corner of Cyberforce to play with the red Zerg drones. He's from South Korea and he goes by the name of Solar. His opponent playing with the pretty pink Protoss probes. There we go, a little bit of alliteration. Also from South Korea, we're looking inside of the main base of Zest. Now, I could go ahead and list off the accomplishments of both of these players, but I feel like I've done that like 100 times for both of them over the course of the last couple of years on this YouTube channel. Just take it from me, okay? Both Zest and Solar are very, very good at SC2, and they are very, very accomplished in their own rights. We should be in for a treat because, well, these are both very, very high-level players, and generally speaking, the top-level players, they show us some sick games. Now, this is going to be a best of 3, so we're not just going to simply see one map. Hopefully, that means we're going to see some build order variety here as well, because playing the same strategy over and over and over again, generally speaking, doesn't really lead to very great results at the highest level of play, because these players can certainly recognize the situation that they're in and then respond knowing the information that they had in the previous game as well. Generally speaking, though, I have seen Solar go for a lot of timing attacks lately in ZVP. I mean, I've watched quite a few of his games, and I'm trying to think, have I seen a late game Zerg vs Protoss from Solar recently? I've been seeing him go for a lot of Swarmhost pushes, a lot of Roach Ravager aggression, a lot of Zergling floods, a lot of even Muta switches, but generally speaking, he does like to focus on that mid-game style as the Zerg player. Now Zest, even though he may be not as passive as, say, for example, like a Stats, who's also obviously a very, very good Protoss player, he does like playing that more laid-back Protoss style, where he just simply defends, and obviously he does go for some pressure early on, but he's very good at just simply holding on and then creating that really strong mid-game force as well. So I kind of feel like most of these games will likely be decided here in the mid-game, but we'll see where this game is going to take us. Generally speaking, though, in this matchup, it is going to be the Zerg player who's under pressure in the earlier part of the game. And I had a couple people reach out, Lowko, why is that actually? I mean, generally speaking, in Terran versus Zerg and then in Protoss versus Zerg as well, it's the Zerg player who's playing defensively, and then the Protoss and the Terran are trying to slow down the Swarm. Well, the reason for that is quite straightforward. It's these little larvae that are crawling right next to the hatchery. Just a simple larva mechanic allows Zerg to produce way more workers than the other races can. I mean, right now we see 6 drones, 5 drones on that production tab for Zerg, whereas we see Zest only producing 2. Now, obviously, Chrono Boost, very, very helpful, but if you leave a Zerg player alone, right, for the first, like, 10 minutes of the game, they will skyrocket to, like, 70 to 80 drones and just produce wave after wave after wave of army, much, much faster than a Terran player or a Protoss player, in this case, can. So usually, Protosses have to do something to put on some sort of pressure, because otherwise Zerg just simply runs away with the victory. And even if it is just like forcing Zerg to make a round of Zerglings, or just forcing them to make units, it means they're not making drones. And that's really what the main reason is. Protoss has to try and slow down Zerg in one way or another. Now, one of the things that I've seen a lot of these top-level Protoss players get really, really, really good at is Warp Prism control. It's gotten a little bit out of hand. I mean, it's taken about 9 years, right, before players really have found the value of these Warp Prisms, but people have gotten ridiculously good at just simply microing the units and basically giving every single one of these Protoss units blink in the earlier part of the game. So we'll see where this game is going to take us. This is a bit of an odd one, actually. We see a Forge coming up here for Zest. He is finally going for an Immortal, but he really did rush out that Prism, so I think he wants to maybe do some Gateway unit aggression. I mean, you may not have Blink, right? But you can still obviously pick up units inside of that Warp Prism just fine. And I have seen Zest pull out some ridiculous micro strats in this matchup. So we'll see what it is he's going to go for. There's this funny dynamic as well, because a lot of the Zerg players are very good at defending the so-called standard. That a lot of Protoss players are trying to steer away from the so-called standard, just because they know that the Zerg is going to be just fine at defending it. But look, technically speaking, right? Zerglings are a great counter against Stalkers. However, if the Stalkers are inside of a Prism, you can't reach them. So I would argue that a Prism is a much better tool than even Blink in the earlier part of the game. Plus, it gives you that potential for a lot more aggression later on into the game as well if Zerg decides to get a little bit cheeky. And already, a lot of those units are forced. And you can see, because of that, at the bottom section of the screen, worker-wise, Protoss is in a pretty healthy spot. I'm curious to see when Zest decides to go for a third, or, there we go, if he decides to go for a bunch of additional gateways. That obviously does mean he could continue the aggression for a little while longer, but with that really quick robotics facility, the Twilight Council has been delayed quite a bit, and going for a push right now without charge, without blink, without glaive the depths, generally speaking, is a little tricky to pull off. So I am assuming that even though we see a bit of a gateway explosion here, well, I mean, we see more gateways coming up. Ugh, I wonder. I was going to say, maybe, I'm assuming he's going to go ahead and take a third base here still, but maybe he does plan on getting a little bit aggressive here. Alternatively, maybe he scouted something that he's a little bit worried about. The timing of the lair obviously is a pretty big tell that Solar could go ahead and get aggressive. He's getting himself that +1 missile upgrade right now. He's getting himself roach speed. They don't properly line up, but he has been producing non-stop units for quite some time. And even though Zest did slow down some of that production of drones, generally speaking, right, Zerg has been in a pretty happy spot right now because Solar has been happily producing a lot of workers. He did lose an Overlord, he did lose a Creep Tumor, he was forced to make some units at the very least, but he has been able to go up to that very comfortable 60 drone count, and now he can start exploding when it comes to that really big Zerg army production. I mean, look at that production tab right now, right? It's literally 1 Immortal being produced and then a ton of Zerg units as well. So we'll see what Solar has got in mind, but I don't think he's going to use these units just to defend the War Prism, right? That's way too much army. I don't see a 4th base anywhere either. I don't see a Hydra Den. I don't see a second, I don't know, second tech structure in general. No Mutas, no second Evolution Chamber. I think that this is going to be some aggression here from Solar as he makes himself up for a timing here as soon as this +1 missile attack upgrade finishes. Now, Zest did manage to obviously get himself a lot of Immortals out, and if there's one unit that's really good at dealing with these Zerg units, it's the Immortal. Especially combined with the Prism, once again. I mean, the Prism is kind of the key to the Protoss army. You can get so much value out of it as you can pick up the units when they're in trouble, bring them to the back of that Protoss army, and then hopefully continue fighting for a little while longer. Force fields are another one of those things that can deal a tremendous amount of damage, but here we go. Force fields are going down. We do see the Immortals immediately microed backwards. Good pickup micro right here by Zest, slowing down the advancement of the Zerg army quite a bit, but the swarm is in really big numbers. Roaches and Ravagers are streaming across the center of this map as Solar continues producing more and more stuff. But look, how much has really died at this point? Right? Has a lot died really at this point? Oh no, 1 Immortal went down. 1 Immortal ended up getting picked off there, but still, that Prism is up in the air, and he's going to be able to continue, well, I guess, now sandwiching some of this Protoss army as well. 1 Immortal right there, running a little bit low, but most of that Zerg army is already gone here. Immortal still from that high ground over at the 3rd, trying to abuse the vision range right there to deal as much damage to the Zerg army as possible. And here we go. This is where that Protoss army can really start being microed quite smoothly. Solar is finally picking up a couple of the kills on the Stalkers and then also those Archons and the Immortals. But the amount of army remaining right here for Zerg is really not that impressive. Well, he needs to be careful. Oh, these Immortals! Woo! Picking them up while the projectile is even flying through the sky. More and more units are being warped in, and I think by the skin of his teeth, Zest might be able to hold on here. Whew! I've said it for a little while, but I genuinely think War Prisms are either like the 2nd best unit in the game or the best unit in the game. Okay? I've said for a very long time, and maybe I'm gonna have to go back on my words, but I've said for a very long time that Queens are the best unit in the game, and they are really good. Right? In the right hands, though, these War Prisms can provide a ridiculous amount of support. That wasn't even perfect micro from Zest, right? Imagine what we're gonna see in like 2 years from now, when players are likely gonna go triple Prism or something at this point in the game, and they will absolutely start smashing these Protoss armies. Okay, well, here we go. Once again, that Prism is gonna be the key in this engagement. Picking up the units right underneath the Corrosive Bile, dropping them off, because that's faster than apparently just simply walking them out of the Corrosive Bile radius. A couple of Zealots have been picked off so far. The Queen is gone right now as well. That War Prism, oh, look at it! It's providing so much value. Not a single one of these big Protoss units has fallen just yet there at the end. Zest gets it together and absolutely smashes that Zerg army. It's curious though, right? Because basically, Zest is the one doing this the most. I haven't really seen a lot of the other top-level Protoss players do this lately. But he goes for a relatively late third Nexus. So in that previous game, he went for a third Nexus around the 6-minute mark after producing, I think, a grand total of 7 or 8 gateways on 2 bases. Generally speaking, when we see players make 7 or 8 gateways, they plan on being aggressive. However, he doesn't get himself the charge upgrade, he doesn't get himself the Blink Stalker upgrade in time either, so getting aggressive is really, really difficult because Zerg is just simply going to be able to kite backwards on creep when you don't have those upgrades. The thing is, he then decides to go for that Nexus at the third base, but he doesn't produce any additional probes. So it's kind of a difficult situation to read, right? Because you don't know how many workers he had. If I'm not mistaken, Zest at the end of that game, he probably had 44 workers, which is enough for full 2-base saturation. And even though he did have that third Nexus, he wasn't actually utilizing it at all. He was really just using it as bait for that Zerg army to go across the map. And obviously, with that really quick War Prism, right, he could then immediately transition towards Immortal production. So usually when Zerg pushes at that point in the game, we see Zerg players fighting 3 Immortals instead of 4. And having that 4th Immortal in the mix really, really did make a big difference there when it came to the defense. So I hope I'm doing a decent job, at the very least, explaining my thoughts about that match. I feel like Zest is one of those Protoss players who's really, really difficult to read. So, for a reference sake, right, we generally speaking at the highest level in StarCraft see the third base go down around the 5-minute mark. So that's a full minute earlier. Now, a minute time is a very long time. 5 to 6 minutes is a big difference. And Zest, instead of adding on additional probes, he goes for additional gateways, and then he seems to be defensive. I guess what makes the most sense, right, is that somehow, some way, Zest got a read on what it was that Solar was going for. Although it's very difficult to scout, right? Zerg can always go ahead and just simply put down an additional base relatively easily. Maybe it has to do with the amount of gases that he scouted from Zerg. Maybe he also knows that Solar just simply likes to go for that build, so he decided to play the opponent rather than the matchup. That's very, very likely as well. But anyways, Zest is definitely a very tricky Protoss opponent to go up against because you don't really know exactly how much he has. I mean, imagine if that third base, right, would have gone down at the 5-minute mark off of the so-called standard, which is 4 gateways, right? At that point, Zest would have been able to defend, yes, with more probes, but with 1 less Immortal and 4 less gateways, right? That would have been a disaster for that Roach Ravager push. So I don't know. It's kind of like Zest knows that something is not quite right, and I wonder what is giving it away, because everything that Solar is doing seems very, very normal. Plus, I guess he did have an observer, right? So maybe he did fly the observer towards the third base and check the amount of gas over there, while the War Prism was in the main and check the amount of gas there. But it's still tricky to figure out exactly what is going on in the mind of this Protoss player, because I can't help but wonder what would have happened in that previous game if Solar just simply took a 4th base, got himself like lurker tech up, because then all of a sudden Zest would have set on a pretty low economy with no proper upgrades and a late 3rd Nexus. I mean, you can't really push without the Twilight Council upgrades. I wonder what that means as well actually for Solar in this particular game. Obviously, he can decide to mix it up. I think that previous match does give him a good read on the mindset that Zest is going into this game with. But anyways, once again, we see that War Prism coming up here for Zest. Very, very similar builds here from both of these players. Additional gateways here are coming up. We'll see if Zest once again decides to go for the same deviation, but I think he wants to go ahead and pressure once more with a couple of those gateway units. So not going for the standard Stargate opener into like Archon drops, not really following it up with anything, but this time around it is going to be Immortals and Stalkers inside of the Prism. Making it difficult here for Solar to guess exactly what's in there, but once again I think Zerglings and Roaches are going to be just fine. Solar though has been utilizing a lot of this time here in the early game to just simply drone up as hard as he possibly can. He's built up that 3rd base. He's now got the lair once again coming up here. Pretty quick lair actually, all things considered. I think that was about 3.5 minutes or so. He's got the Roach Warren done here already, lined up really nicely to finish up around the same time as that main lair. And obviously, once that finishes, he can start up that Roach speed upgrade. He can go for an Overseer, and that's really what he's looking for. He needs to know whether or not it is going to be some Dark Templar aggression. But I think upon seeing the Immortal, he knows that he likely isn't going to need that Overseer here for the time being. One Immortal, though, or one Overlord, rather, made its way towards the main base. It's now scouting around, trying to see if there's once again that gateway explosion. At this point in the game, that's not the case. I think a couple of Adepts, by the way, tried to shade towards the third base as well. I think they ended up getting a couple of those drone kills there. No big gateway explosion just yet, but there we have it. Just a couple of seconds later, we do indeed see Zest putting down a whole bunch of gates, as well as a Twilight and then a Forge. I think there may have been a bit of a lag spike, which obviously pops up that screen saying, hey, there's lag going on right now. I think that maybe Solar tried to see if the lag ended up going away, which is the only reason why I can't imagine him typing ASD, ASD. Anyways, once again, 6 gateways coming up. So, you know what? I kind of would like to see what happens here if Zest is left alone. I kind of would like to see Solar just simply sitting back and going up to like a Hydra Den here, and then maybe like... Or even Swarm Host, but just higher tech, not just Roach Ravager. Just build on that economy that you've got. Okay, I think that was indeed a little bit of lag. Alright. There we go. Luckily in the replays, we never have to wait for it if the lag spikes, and it just continues straight on. Anyways, I think that indeed Solar, well, he's making a lot of units, but the timing of that Evo is a little bit odd. I think that Solar may very well... Maybe it was actually an hallucinated Phoenix that previous game as well that confirmed the amount of gas. But I think that Solar might very well decide to play a little bit more passively here. Although there is a lot of army. Maybe he's anticipating Protoss to go for a push. But once again, now we're 6.5 minutes into the game. There is a no third base taken here by Zest, who's been happily sitting back, macroing up that big Protoss army. The thing is, he's doing all of this, right? Off of a inferior economy. On paper, right now for the last couple of minutes, Solar has been mining significantly more. It's 55 drones versus 44 probes. There's no third nexus this time around either, so basically Zest has to go for some sort of push. I mean, he can still go and take the third base, but if he waits too long, I really feel like Solar is gonna run away with just superior, you know, army production, right? He can just simply make more. Already, we see 171 army supply here for the Zerg player. If Solar decided to push once again into this army, obviously this decision here from Zest would have been wonderful. But I think from what I mentioned earlier as well, just simply letting Protoss sit on that base and just, you know, giving them that inferior economy is 100% okay. Just, you know, take your time. Make a lot of units. They'll come to you eventually. Or I guess, alternatively, Solar can also decide to push when he's maxed out, which is just about to happen. And actually, I kind of feel like now we see the opposite of what we had in that previous game. Zest seems to be walking into a maxed out Zerg trap. Oh, dude. Star Senses right here. The Zerglings, though, did decide to make their way across the map, and I think one Zealot may have been sleeping on the job. Still, those Zealots are being warped in, but I think the Star Senses right there of Zest told him, you know what? This Zerg player is a little bit too calm. He's letting me kill the creep here on the low ground? I don't know. I feel like most Zerg players would try and jump on this opportunity. As soon as I walk up this ramp, I'm probably going to be pounced on by a lot of that swarm. And you know what? I'm just going to simply kill some creep and then go back home. A bit of a curious position here, though. Solar finally awkwardly decides to add on a couple of drones once again. 55, I think is what it was. Isn't particularly much. He didn't end up losing a couple drones here as well, but I think most of that was just new structures that have been added on, as the Hydro Den as well as the fourth base are right now acquired. Okay, now this is a difficult ramp to push up on, okay? Once again, there's that very scary Warp Prism up in the air, providing a lot of value, picking up the weakened Protoss units. Nicely done there by Zest. Utilizing the best unit in the game. Very nicely. Okay, so... is he gonna push up? You think he's gonna push up this ramp? Ooh, nice snipe. I kind of get the feeling he won't. I mean, pushing up a ramp right here, it's pretty difficult to do. Now, keep in mind, Protoss doesn't have any splash damage here, other than the Archons, I suppose, but no High Templar, no Colossus, no Disruptors. It's just simply pure, straight-up units that can obviously deal a lot of damage, especially with good Prism Micro once again. I feel like I've brought that up like 17 times already, but generally speaking, right, this is a Protoss army that's gonna need some sort of splash here the longer this goes on, especially once these lurkers decide to join the fray. That's the most curious lurker den placement I've ever seen. I know there's a fight happening in the center, but man, what is that? What are you doing, Solar? That is... that is not helping you out in any way, shape, or form. Well, these zealots still trying to slice and dice some of those roaches. And once charge comes off cooldown, I feel like these units are going to actually be in a pretty good spot. Still though, big fight right here in the center of the map as well. A lot of those high value Protoss units still alive and well. Zest though, he's now fighting an army that's based around Roach Ravager Hydra. And those Hydras, they're very good, especially once Grooved Spines finishes here. Because that's going to allow them to shoot over force fields and then over the roaches very, very comfortably. So as long as Solar is on creep right now until Muscular Augments is done, he's going to be in a pretty good spot. Okay, so I'm curious, right? I mentioned it in the previous game. I think that Queens, for the average player, are the best unit in the game. However, I'm going to make a bold statement, okay? After seeing what players have done lately, I genuinely think that in the right hands, the War Prism is the best unit in the game. Let me know down below in the comment section of this video what you think is the best unit in the game. I genuinely think in the right hands, the War Prism is incredible. And it may very well be the best. It's a bit of a tricky one though. There's a lot of potential units that obviously can go for that task. Anyways, now that the Zealots are cleaned up, that Roach Zergling army that was waiting on the top side of the map managed to stream into the natural. At the same time, a lot of those high-value units are finally being picked off right now, as Solar decided to also hit in the center of the map. He's now picking up a couple of those units. Oh, he does want to push up this ramp. This is a tricky position. That's still a lot of Immortals, a lot of those Archons as well. No Prism here, but there we go. It comes flying by. And the Prism does indeed get sniped now by those Hydralisks. And all of a sudden, right, a lot of those Protoss reinforcements are being picked off as soon as they spawn. Eventually, of course, those roaches will be killed as well. But Solar has been happily sitting on 4 bases already. He's getting himself a lot of gas, and more gas means more lurkers. There's this weird dynamic between Archons, Immortals, and Zealots and Hydra Lurker. On paper, Lurkers absolutely smash that army, but if you get enough Archons and Immortals especially, you can sometimes walk over that army. But at some point, you kind of do need some High Templar in the mix to cast Psionic Storm, just to soften up those Lurkers. Lurkers actually have a lot of hit points, 200. That's a lot more than these Hydras, but here we go. A wonderful engagement by Solar, creating a pincer attack right here, fighting this Protoss army on both sides. Those Lurkers obviously can tunnel underground, over that debris or under that debris, and eventually it is going to be Solar who obtains the victory here in game number 2. Alrighty, so here we go. Final game of this series. Map number 3 is Kairos Junction. I really feel like Solar though read his opponent successfully. He analyzed the timing of the 3rd base in game number 1. He recognized that Protoss was using that quick War Prism to get 4 Immortals out and then also build additional gateways before taking the 3rd base. But then also, on top of that, he must have realized that even though Zest took a 3rd base, he had no intention of mining it there in the early game because there were only 44 workers, which is just enough to saturate 2 bases. Now in game number 2, Zest went for a very similar build. However, this time around, Solar decided to just simply sit back and take that economic advantage. He didn't over-drone, right? It's not like he went up to like 66 drones, which is of course enough for 3-base saturation. He just simply set on what he knew was a bigger economy than Protoss could have at that point in the game, which is 55 in apparently that case, which is 11 workers more than the Protoss had at that point. And he just simply made non-stop army off of that amount of workers, and obviously eventually that allowed him to just simply get way more units out. Now Zest was waiting, right? He was waiting for the Zerg player to engage. The Zerg player never came until much later on into the game, and then that 3rd base timing really did hurt Zest quite a bit, as the economy that he had was just simply not nearly as good. Eventually though, we saw Solar then transition, and using that time that he created for himself and that economic advantage that he created for himself to go up to 4 bases, and then also Hydras and Lurkers. It's some very clever gameplay. I wonder what Zest decides to go for in this particular match. Considering he's tried being cheeky in 2 games, right? And it worked in game 1, but in game number 2 it got read really wonderfully there by Solar. And that's what I mean, right? In a best of 3 series, players do adapt to the opponent really smoothly. I kind of feel like Zest has to switch up his early game build. I don't think he can go for the same build again, because Solar will just counter him harder. I mean, in the previous game, obviously, he still made a bit of a gamble, assuming that Protoss was only gonna go assuming Protoss once again is gonna go for that late third base. I mean, if it would have been a very standard, like, 8 gateway zealot all-in or something along those lines, right? With 32 probes, then the 55 he made would have been a bit of a gamble, but I think he made the correct call. I think if once again Zest decides to go for the same build, and actually, yeah, he's not getting the Warp Gate research, so it's going to be a Stargate. He's not. But I think if he would have gone for the same build once again, Solar would have just absolutely smashed it. Okay. So it's going to be a Stargate opener. Now, I know, guys, even though we won't see a Warp Prism as quickly in this game, I still think there's a good chance that the Stargate will be followed up with a Twilight Council and a Robo. The thing is, the most standard of standard builds right now in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup is definitely still that Stargate into the Robo, into the Twilight Council, into the High Templar. And you can obviously morph into Archons and really keep the Zerg player on their toes really, really nicely. Now, 2 Adepts are currently available. Link speed is a little bit delayed because of that really quick third base that Solar went for. I like this a lot here, actually, for Zest. Already forcing a lot of these drones off of the mineral line, killing a single one of them as well, but this is a ton of lost mining time. A worker in StarCraft mines for about 0.8 to 1 mineral a second, depending on how far away the mineral patch is. That's a lot, right? So just having these 16 drones right here on idle for like what? 10, 15 seconds? Maybe even longer than that? That's a couple hundred lost minerals right there. So those couple adepts who now run back with their tail between their legs, they have certainly been worth their weight in gold. And I love that shading behind the Stalker so they can fight for a little while and then get to the safety of that Protoss wall. Alright, so it is gonna be that Oracle. Now, Zerg didn't scout the Stargate, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, he did, actually. He must have once again sacrificed an Overlord. I was gonna say, we still see the Spore Crawlers coming up here at the correct time. Just simply knowing that Protoss delayed the Cybernetics Core upgrade right there initially is already a lot of information for Zerg. Since a Stargate costs 150 minerals, or 150 gas rather, and Twilight Council, and the robotics facility both cost 100 gas. Generally speaking, by the time that the Cybercore finishes, Protoss has 150. So if they want to go for the quick Stargate, usually Warp Gate will be delayed. And Zerg can obviously see if the little, you know, Cybernetics Core right there is gonna spin. You can see if the animation is moving. And if it is, you know that indeed there is gonna be that research. Alrighty, so nice defense so far by Solar. Shooing away to the best of his abilities those 2 oracles. One of the queens, though, did end up paying for that with her life, but once again, we see a lot of drones being produced here by Solar, who was forced to make some Zerglings here in the early game, but the majority of them right now are being utilized right here for scouting. And once more, now we see Zest playing a normal build. He decides to go for the 3rd Nexus at the 5-minute mark. Prism as a follow-up here as well. We see the Templar Archives coming up after the Twilight Council. So Zest is certainly going to follow this up with what I assume to be Archon drops. Alright, so this is basically as standard goes, okay? Zest going for what we consider to be the normal build. This is what I was trying to mention at the beginning of the previous game as well when explaining game number 1. We see 4 gateways, a 3rd base. I think actually going for that roach push in this particular case might be a really good option, right? The thing is, there's still that prism, right? And that prism is very scary because if you keep that prism alive, you can always pressure Zerg as soon as they decide to make a move across the map. And that's what makes this hard. If you go for that roach Ravager push once again, which is what Solar might very well be going for, I mean, it kind of looks like he is, right? He's actually made quite a few drones, and now he's following it up once again with quite a few of those roaches as well. We'll see if he uses them defensively, but as soon as he decides to go for that roach Ravager push, if he were to go for that, that prism is certainly going to go back in to try and deal a little bit of damage. And obviously, when you are going for the push, ideally you want to have as many units on the other side of the map as possible. I hope I'm doing a good job, by the way, explaining why this matchup is pretty complicated and why there's a lot of mind games at play as well. If you have any questions about it, let me know down below. I'm always reading comments. I'm always trying my best to at the very least, provide you insight into why some of these decisions are made in SC2. But here we go. Double oracles. Going into the main base. A couple queens available, though. Yep, they are certainly going to be shoot back once again as well. It's, by the way, going to be the Infestation Pit this time around here for Solar. So not going to be the standard Roach Ravager push. I think this is going to be for that Swarm Host play. Swarm Host, very, very good in this matchup. They're pretty common nowadays as well. Zerkling, by the way, right there confirming that indeed additional probes are still being produced, which is really important. An Overseer right now moving in as well, probably trying to figure out if maybe there's going to be like a Robotics Bay, or, you know, if there's a chance for quick Colossus play, or maybe even Disruptors at this point in the game. But nope, it's just going to be Archons, Immortals, and of course Zealots. Charge just a couple seconds from finishing here. There's a lot of gateways here. Zest obviously has been macroing on a bunch more bases this time around, or at least a bunch more probes, which means that the amount of units he can actually produce right now is quite a bit bigger as well. And this is a really scary Protoss army. The Swarm Hosts are coming up right now. I really like Swarm Host offensively. I'm not entirely certain on using them defensively, as Zest right now is pushing into the third base here of the Protoss player. The Locusts are available. They are going to be utilized here immediately, but I think with good control, right, you can certainly kill a lot of those Locusts before they deal critical amount of damage. Once again, the best unit in the game, picking up a lot of those high-value targets. Sure, the Zealots can tank some of the damage, but as long as the Archons and the Immortals stay alive, this is just fine. Pushing that Zerg player back as well, so the Corrosive Balls cannot land right on top of the Prism. Still fighting in range as well, so units can be picked up inside of the Prism as well. And the Swarm Host right now absolutely useless because they're waiting for that Locust Wave to come off cooldown. The Oracles also still accumulated a lot of energy. They apparently are now target firing down the Swarm Host, and with what seems to be a very lethal timing attack, Zest is absolutely rolling over the Zerg army, reading Solar like a book. Maybe he knows that Solar likes to go for Swarm Host play on this map, right? Maybe he just simply read that his opponent was gonna go for this push by seeing some of those early game moves, but 22 drones end up going down, and sure, a lot of the Protoss units got killed as well, but the majority of those really, really scary units is still alive. We see Protoss happily macroing on 3 bases, now even warping it at home. He knows that he's not really in any kind of trouble right now, as long as he does not get a lot of Zerglings in his mineral line. So having a couple of those Archons at home is wonderful. Also even going now for the Dark Shrine. I think the Dark Shrine is a really good choice as well. If you are in trouble, oftentimes, right, Zerg is going to have a hard time doing anything at this point in the game. The best Zerg could do right now is go for some sort of 2-base all-in. And if they decide to go for that, the last thing they have is detection. Because, you know, you haven't seen any kind of Dark Templar. You haven't seen any units that really require detection. So Dark Templar can definitely be utilized offensively, but I think especially in this case, defensively as well, if Zerg decides to go for a bit of a push. Now, the Prism is still around. The Immortals are still being, you know, useful. Picking up some of those high-value Zerg units if they can target fire down some of the Ravagers, that would be wonderful. When you're playing Roach Ravager Swarm Host, supply counts are pretty much always heavily in favor of Zerg. And man, those Oracles still softening up some of those units as well. If you are not ahead in supply when you are playing Roach Ravager Swarm Host, yeah, you are in a lot of trouble, as indeed Zest now shows the amount of units. This is really only half the army, as 4 Archons now also come marching up the ramp. Zest once again successfully mind-gamed his opponent, and he obtains the victory here in this best of 3 series. Wonderful play there. I hope you enjoyed watching it as well. If you did, make sure you hit the like button down below. And if you want to see more, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you get a notification as soon as I upload more. A special shout out, of course, to the Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your generosity. But for now, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you once again in the next one.